Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, High Touch End-to-End Services to Enhance the Patient Journey. This webinar is sponsored by TrialCard. TrialCard Incorporated provides patient affordability, medication access and adherence, patient support, and clinical trial services on behalf of pharmaceutical manufacturers. Founded in 2000, TrialCard has connected nearly 33 million patients with over 15 billion in branded drug savings to date. The company is headquartered in Morrisville, North Carolina. I'm Sean Edwards from World Congress, and I will be introducing our webinar today. Just a couple of quick announcements before we start. First, I'd like to explain how we're handling questions. Due to the number of attendees, participant lines are muted. However, if you'd like to submit a question for our speaker, please do so using the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer all questions that we have time to address during our session today. Also, please note that the webinar will be recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the video so that you can view it again. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Bill Dupere is VP and Practice Lead for Market Access Solutions at TrialCard Incorporated. We are pleased to have him here. Bill, welcome. Thanks for doing the webinar today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean mentioned, I am VP and Practice Lead here at TrialCard for Market Access Solutions. By way of background on myself as an intro and bio, it's pretty much all things pharma. Started out in clinical trials, went into regulatory affairs and project management, then product management, then portfolio management. My company got purchased, chose to go off on my own, do freelance oncology product marketing, helping formative companies launch their first cancer product, and also launched a couple of cancer businesses along the way. Ended up becoming COO at a niche specialty pharmaceutical company for about 5 years, ended up having a health crisis, had to step down. And when I resurrected from that and decided what I wanted to do, I focused on patient access services. That was my passion. That was my interest. I was a student, if you will, and fortunate enough to land a gig at TrialCard and went and ran programs for several years. And the leadership at TrialCard asked me to step forward and become practice lead here. So thank you for your time today. Sincerely appreciative of you taking time out of your busy schedules. With respect to our agenda for today, excuse me while I get my slide. Just a couple slides to give a framework and a backdrop and a backstory. For most of the attendees, this may be familiar to you. It may be a different perspective on the way that you look at our business of patient access solutions. But this framework is just really to level set, since there's such a variety of pre-registrants today. Just want to give a level context. And from there, we'll go to a macro market situation analysis, and we'll look at the perspectives from payers and providers and patients and pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical life science companies. Then we'll take a step back and look at the implications on the future of patient support service program design. And then we're going to go deep and look at each of those milestones in that framework and give a summary of what's current in the market today, and then speak to both the trends and the next steps that we see with respect to technology and processes for each step in the milestone journey. And then we'll come back at the end and just look at the entirety of patient support services as an integrated ecosystem across various stakeholders. A couple points in this presentation. We're going to take a pause and present a couple polls of some questions that I think are material as we think about patient support service programs holistically. So as we said, this framework is just a start in how we here at TrialCard think about the overall point of patient access to complex therapy. And typically that means first and foremost is onboarding that patient, subsequently investigating their benefits specific to the individual NDC in question. In so doing, we both identify and subsequently address, mitigate what their respective barriers to access are, and there are many. From there, an analysis and determination of what the best option is for that patient to procure the product and then overlay the various types of financial assistance solutions, which could be many also. And then at the start of therapy, curating that experience and giving them a platform to engage with the program and the services on a going forward basis. So this is just a framework we're going to use for our time together today. And I should say, I'm going to take a bias for this particular presentation and speak specifically in the context of oral therapeutics adjudicated to the drug benefit. Of course, many specialty therapeutics are on the med bin side, but in deference to time, I just personally took an approach to keep it on the oral therapeutic side. So now we're going to take that same journey and just lay out and isolate what, first and foremost, what we hope to be the green path. Green path is the barrier without, the access to therapy without barriers. And of course, they've got benefits, the drug is covered, there's no restrictions, or if there are, those have been cleared. And if they weren't cleared the first time, the appeal was successful. And then subsequently you move to overlaying the appropriate copay, they're eligible for copay, and subsequently it goes to dispense. But as we know, that's not often the case, the green light, if you will. But nonetheless, even if it were a restriction, oftentimes we want that to get cleared. Or in the case of many specialty therapeutics, that time of clearing that PA takes too long, and you have to put in place ostensibly a bridge program, for example. And then the red here is more indicative of what a common barrier to access journey is. Either the patient doesn't have insurance, the drug is not covered, the PA is not cleared, the appeal's unsuccessful, they're a Medicare beneficiary and therefore they're not eligible for copay. You send them out for copay assistance, they can't get funding. And these are all the types of barriers that we in this industry both face, deal with, and have to address on behalf of our patients and other stakeholders along the way. So philosophically, we want to make sure the green keeps going. We don't intercede inappropriately, unnecessarily. We want to make sure we intervene on the yellow and do so in concordance with the business rules established with our clients. And then on the red, that's where our services are specifically geared and designed to address each of these respective barriers to access. So now we're going to go talk just at a high level on that journey and those issues and what at a macro level we're seeing first with payers. The pandemic pushed forward many initiatives, principally around telehealth. We now know that value-based contracts are gaining momentum and becoming real and under pilot evaluation and actually moving into contracting. And we know that our payers as a constituent, as an audience, if you will, of our biopharmaceutical clients, they're very mature in their utilization management. Some would say overly aggressive, particularly with respect to accumulators and maximizers, and putting in place programs that actually intercept payment financial assistance for patients. And all of this is in the context of rising specialty therapeutic costs. And now they, as an industry, are having to be more transparent with respect to the price, both for their services as well as payment for product. And this, we're also seeing a movement towards population health, population being, of course, all of us on health plans, but more specifically, individual subtypes of patients based on their disease and demographics. On the provider side, at a macro level, there's now less time with patients. They're having to deal with so many technical advances, both in terms of how they perform their services, as well as what treatments are now available to them. For these treatments are becoming very specific based on molecular diagnostic workups. So they're having to adopt those diagnostics. And because of COVID, I personally, for example, had a very long conversation with an ID doc about whether or not I should have access to the third dose of the COVID vaccine in advance because of my immunosuppression. And that telehealth moment was seminal because it showed to me that we can have substantive conversations with experts irrespective of where they are in the world. The other thing that I think is really meaningful in this market is the real-time benefit investigation for clinicians actually having visibility into the patient's benefits design at the time they're ready to prescribe and whether or not that particular product is favored to them versus alternatives. With respect to patients, those of us in this market know that affordability of these therapeutics is a real deterrent. Patients are now becoming super reliant on their smartphones, and consumerism is increasing, particularly for specialty therapeutics, because it's becoming hard for them to access therapy. So they're now having to advocate both for themselves and as part of a constituency that most represent who they are. You see this in rare diseases, for example. They do seek our services, but they have to opt into those services. And the mechanisms to do so, the tactics to do so, have to accommodate an environment where they may not be with their clinician at the moment the treatment decision is made. And all of this is summing up to they're now quarterbacks of their own care, either they themselves, their caregiver, their partners, or their family. And then on the pharma side, precision therapeutics is legit. There's so many targeted therapies available today. There's so many subspecialized patient populations. The indications are very narrow and specific, such that the eligibility of the patient population is now small. It's a 0 or 2 less than what it used to be, which means every single patient matters. And they're in so doing, the price point, the number of zeros is going up. And because of that, they're having to justify the value of these therapeutics, which means they're in constant pursuit of data, particularly data on the patient journey and the performance of those patients on therapy, both real world evidence as well as the patients themselves. And all of this must fit within the provider's workflow. Some of these, for example, require differential diagnostic that is interceding the normal course of care and having to go get these diagnostics performed to defend and inform patient appropriateness for care. And all of this is in a backdrop of wanting to simplify access to these therapeutics. So this is a busy slide, I acknowledge that, but it's just the market as a whole. And it's one that if you just sit back and reflect on, I think it's interesting and informative. So now we're just going to walk through at a high level what all these macro trends are, what this patient journey means holistically with respect to where we are today, where we need to get to. In my role as a practice lead here at TrialCard for Market Access Solutions, it's ostensibly an architect role in a sales support function in working directly with both prospective new clients as well as existing clients to both optimize the overall design of their programs and subsequently any modifications thereto. And one consistent thing that we're getting is they definitely want to avoid traditional patient enrollment forms and do so by staying close to the core workflows. On the benefits investigation side, there's definitely both an expectation and a trend to use automated e-services first, supplemented by human staffing second. On the mitigating access side of this journey, all stakeholders, and there are multiple, the clinicians, the patients, the pharma themselves, the provider providing these services, all of the different vendors in that ecosystem, just needing a transparency. And it's not just where the patient is in their journey, but transparency as to what the next issue is that has to be resolved in that journey. With respect to procurement, we TrialCard are taking an approach, as is the entire industry, of moving beyond traditional mechanisms of referral by phone or referral by fax, or just moving information in a manner that's routine and customary, that instead being much more integrated with our channel partners. We'll describe what that means later. And then the financial affordability, these programs are becoming increasingly complex. Arguably why? Because our payers are becoming more, let's just say it's becoming harder. It's becoming harder for everybody because of some of the programs that are being placed that literally rob patients of financial assistance that was directed for them. And because of that, our services are becoming much more important, and they're becoming much more centric to that individual patient and their respective, not just barrier, but their financial affordability, which means that as they start therapy and as they progress onto therapy, engaging them in digital mobile manner that allows them to participate in their journey as they go. So at this point, we're going to step back and go deep now, and we're going to look at each step in this journey. We're going to outline just in a bullet point fashion some of the current standards that patient support programs are operating today. And then on the right side of the page, we'll just lay out some trends that are material that we see happening in the marketplace that as we design patient support programs of the future, we'll have to be mindful of and incorporate into our architecture. So on the enrollment side, more often than not, patients have to opt into these services. Those in our industry know this. Those who are providing care for patients know this. And we have to facilitate and orchestrate their enrollment into these services. And that has to be done in a manner that's consistent with how the patient wants to enroll, what's easiest for them. Gone are the days of forcing them into standard mechanisms. Now are the days of giving them options. And one of those options is just start the patient with a prescription. Avoid the enrollment form in its entirety, pick up all the attestations and consent when required, as required, but just get that patient into the healthcare system quickly. And you engage them. You engage them at the moment the prescription is written. You do so through a variety of ways, but ultimately it's stimuli. In addition to the prescription, the decision to treat is stimuli to actually get the patient to the program. And unfortunately, the world today is still separate enrollment forms or separate prescriptions based on the nature of the program, a start versus a prescription, for example, a start of therapy or a bridge, or a non-commercial dispense versus an original prescription. So from a trend perspective, if you're following the EHR market, you know with certainty that payers are now integrating the standard disclosure of the eservices transmissions and just moving that team in CPDP technology into the provider's workflows so that they can see and have visibility into the formulary status. And I emphasize this is before the prescription is written. The world today is where you see it after it arrives at the pharmacy, after it enrolls at the hub, after you investigate benefits. But the world is coming where clinicians are going to see this before they write the prescription. And that has a real implication on shifting of care as a function of formulary. We know that patients are advocating for access to treatment, but we're also now seeing patients advocating for the access to the differential diagnostic workup to define whether or not they are appropriate for care. That's an important trend to keep in mind. Both of these add up together that patients are now a constituent. They always have been, we always focus on them, but now they're becoming more proactive in wanting to directly engage upstream and as part of the referral for these therapeutics. We see a world where the patients may actually advocate for access to therapy. You're seeing that now in diabetes, for example, where it's direct-to-patient consumerism happening because of insulin and all the different kits and delivery systems that go with that. You're getting ecosystems where the patients are driving that care. And the implication on the onboarding in this first milestone, we believe, is that there's going to be pressure on patient support service programs to actually become an agent of the patient. That goes without saying. We're doing that today. We're advocating on the behalf of the patient. But when I say this, what I'm really suggesting is that I think there's pressure coming where we have to advocate on that patient's behalf directly to their plan. Yes, the provider has to defend the decision. Yes, the provider has to do what they need to do, but there's a role coming where the patients are going to become participative in that. So at this point, I'm going to take a pause, and Sean, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm just very curious of those registrants today, patient consent. And when do you receive consent? Is it before services can start? Is it as services start, but you've got to back it up and go get formal? Is it when individual services are deployed? Or are you a pipeline asset and you haven't dealt with this, or maybe this is not a consideration for you? So just take a quick poll here, hit submit button when you have your answer, and then Sean, I'll turn it over to you briefly to describe how we'll get the results back. All right. Well, interesting. I grin because I would have predicted this, but I didn't expect it to be half. Those of you who are in patient access services within a pharmaceutical company, by no means am I asking you to go toe-to-toe with your compliance colleagues, because many of you are under corporate restrictions or corporate governances, and you don't have this kind of flexibility. But we do see a world where consent is going to move to when the specific service is required, with some sort of allowance for verbal attestation to be followed by. And many of you aren't, this is not applicable for you. So interesting. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to go ahead and move on from this. Okay, and the second milestone on the benefits, e-eligibility is routine and customary, and by e-eligibility, it's essentially card finder technology where we can confirm the patient has insurance, yes or no, what insurance they have, even down to the member and the PCN number, member ID number, but it's not going to give you coverage detail. So we as entities are now contracting with eServices partner to help us gain more visibility, more insight into the actual coverage for the NDC itself. And in the best world possible, actually get visibility into what the patient's financial responsibility is also. Having said that, though, we don't always get there. We don't always get there. And in fact, I would say it's at best 50-50 at this point, and it really is a direct correlation to the product and its coverage landscape environment. Is it a launch product for which coverage is still being established, or is it a mature product for which the databases have caught up with the coverage? So inside of and as part of and accessible to agents within PSPs, for example, here at TrialCard Policy Reporter, we have visibility to what payer policy is because of databases in a curated manner. Going forward, these automated services, there's every expectation on behalf of our clients that these are going to be routine, they're going to be customary, they're going to be expected, they're going to be part of our operations, and that we're going to use these in lieu of headcount and staffing as we go forward. But it doesn't solve for individualized patient access. So these services, and this is routine, customary, this is the life of a rare disease therapeutic. you're going to have to tailor our services and uniquely to that patient, their design, their benefits, that product, its restrictions, what you have to do to resolve those restrictions, gain coverage, but then overlay the patient, their ability to understand their financial services, their access to that yes or no, the healthcare they have around them. So all of these factors we now know are leading to patient-centric services deployed in a curated manner. And this perhaps is the most interesting trend I see in the marketplace, the most material change, where we as hubs, patient support service providers, are going to operate as intermediaries between the providers, between the channel groups, and we're going to actually adopt these real-time benefit technologies inside of our operations, inside of our ecosystems, and we're going to do so in partnership and handholding with the limited distribution channel partners that are part of these complex specialty therapeutics. And we'll discuss that in more detail in a moment. And the data are going to move from where the patient is, what step they're in, to not just the step they're in, the barrier they're on, but also what to do next. And what to do next is a function of what the barrier is and the programs that are aligned for those respective services. But we're talking about how to help that patient and defining that for our customers. So on the milestone 3, mitigating access, current standards, there's so many of us in this marketplace, but unfortunately, there's not many that can actually work holistically end to end. Because there's only a handful of us in this industry that can immediately start therapy, get a visibility near real time into what the problem is, inform those stakeholders when it happens, and then start the journey based on that individual patient's barriers. And the EPAs, which are primarily holistically resolving prior authorizations, resolving coverage restrictions, addressing those, fully understand why we use a pharmacy first model, get it into the hands of the adjudicating entity, get a visibility, transparency, and understanding of what the problems are, attempt to adjudicate that claim, make it their responsibility as part of their fiduciary pharmacy responsibility. But that's only getting us so far. It's only getting us so far. We still have to use manual tactics to follow up with clinicians because the restrictions and the definitions, while defined and while accessible electronically, they're still having to defend their decision treatment. And in the market today, many of these technologies are at a point where they're informing the clinician, the agents of what to do next. We're going to see more of that. And we're going to see it in the form of the clinicians, the patients themselves are going to have direct access to what this patient status is in their journey. We here at TrialCard, for example, are using Mango Digital Mobile Web to actually inform the patient of where they are in the process from start to finish, prescription written to starting therapy in a digital mobile web environment. We also are moving towards a world where we're going to share in the cloud in a secure manner, in a compliant manner, applicable at a state level, where we can work with our channel partners as part of the limited distribution network that our mutual clients have put in place. We're actually going to be in an environment where we can use their MPI number, not in a test claim environment, but actually ping in an electronic services environment and have visibility and transparency as though they were adjudicating the claim. It's not in their pharmacy operating environment. It's operating as though it's the same network. It's operating as though a specialty pharmacy in a retail network is performing services on behalf of a retail outlet within that same network. And that's important because then you're going to have your PSP, your agent, then your agents are going to have full transparency and be able to actually clear that path forward. The way the market is today, there's a lot of different a lot of different entities involved in the patient ecosystem. And the implications are you're getting handoffs between different vendors who are performing specified services. In the world going forward, those are going to be handshakes. And those are going to be individuals that are going to be able to make decisions and employ and deploy the respective program for that specific patient. And all of that is getting in integration across the ecosystem to a few select strategic partners, where you have your cornerstone foundational partners who have the multiple of these services integrated in their ecosystem that you're then bolting on additional services to. On the best procurement side, do a quick time check, we're good. We know well that many of these therapeutics are using limited specialty pharmacy networks that now extend to include both the pharmacies within the healthcare system and or the practices themselves. There's a lot of variability in the marketplace we see with respect to whether or not manufacturers choose or not to include the payer PBM-owned SPs. There's both reasons to do that and there's reasons not to do that. And there is every attempt in these types of models, these pharmacy-first models, to attempt to adjudicate that claim before you enroll patients. Of course, all of these models have most of them have an option to enroll the patient directly into these services instead of going directly to the pharmacy first. And clinicians want to do that for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, the coverage determination is going to identify the appropriate specialty pharmacy. And our job is to do that and do that quickly and simply and keep that prescription moving towards fill. In the future, we are going to see, TrialCard are doing this, using the non-commercial dispensing pharmacy as an intake pharmacy. It's serving on behalf of the limited distribution network as a place in a curated manner, in a customized manner, to actually start that patient on therapy and do so adjudicating on behalf of the pharmacies in the network what's best for that patient. And these e-services are going to be able to identify do so in a curated manner and in a manner that's consistent and reliable and expeditious. And in that environment, we're going to see much more use of e-prescriptions being transferred electronically, of course, in compliance with state laws, since e-prescriptions, electronic prescription transfer is mandated by state laws. We also see a world where the attestations and the consents and the requirements for assuring that on file the patient's consents, the provider consents, and all the different paragraphs that covers are going to be done, but they're going to be done so either as part of or as needed when needed. And they're not going to be dependent on getting that information prior to these services. On the financial affordability side, it's very common that both for MedBin and pharmacy, that these services are accessible and activated both inside of the patient support service program after enrollment, but also accessible to the providers outside of the network as well. And these risk mitigation strategies, those of you know TrialCard, my colleagues, Kelly Bennett, Jason Zimchek, Rick Fry, others, have created TC Synapse as being the best in class for these risk mitigation services. And we have online enrollment today in the market, particularly for free goods programs, so that you can separate and isolate the need for these types of services and determine eligibility and determination of eligibility as a separate and distinct referral. And that's true because many of our clients are divorcing and separating and putting a real wall between commercial support services and PAP type services. So therefore it's a compliance regulatory reason for doing this also. It's going to be routine, we refer our patients, but moving forward, case management in the past used to be specific to the journey in its entirety. That still will be. No discourse against that. But as financial affordability becomes more complex, and as the implications of accumulators, maximizers, CMS 2023, as the manner and form and amount of affordability support gets to the patient, financial navigation is going to become more robust, and it's going to become more orchestrated, engineered, and frankly, informed and experienced. It's because we're going to have direct to patient solutions as part of and in response to the CMS 2020 rule, which at this point has every probability of going forward and being enacted. And, you know, I don't want to bash payers here. You do what you do. We're thankful for what you do. But at the end of the day, these accumulator maximizer solutions, they're fringe with respect to the percent of patients they affect, but they're problematic. And they're a pain, to be frank. That's going to push these patients to advocate, and it's going to push these patients to appeal. And that appeal, we predict, is going to get rather nasty in public. And then lastly, ongoing support. We're in a world in non-mandatory hubs, and as such, the skew is getting the problem patients who were not resolved and solved inside the SPs. You know, traditional phone text, that's common every day. We have nurses. My colleague Diane runs, and Heather run programs that are both proactive in outreach to inform and educate and orient patients to their therapy and their disease, but also reactive to respond to inquiries as they come into the program. And these navigators, they're going to assist. They do so as needed when needed. They're there. But going forward, digital mobile web platforms, they're going to become the norm, and they're going to become more common, particularly as patients become reliant as Command Central on their smartphones for their healthcare. This goes without saying, but we're seeing much more trend of financial navigation being holistic to be inclusive of all forms of assistance to patients, be they the referral to foundations, be they direct copay for qualified eligible patients, be they bridge product for patients that have a pause button or having a problem accessing, have a gap in their coverage, have a gap in their insurance, be it as a starter supply for some patients and some of our clients who actually want to start patients in an organized manner. And all of this is becoming orchestrated with one provider and in collaboration with field-based teams. And this pharmacy to pharmacy ERX transfer, that will become routine, that will become common, that will become the manner in which we do business on a going forward basis. So I'm going to take one quick pause before we close out and move on to questions. Just curious, take a poll here. If any of you in industry today that are using your non-commercial dispensing pharmacy as an intake pharmacy for enrollment into your patient support programs. While we're doing this, just let me take a pause and thank you again for sticking with me as I've blown through all these slides in a rather fast manner, but just gives you a sense of where we are, where we're headed at each step in the milestone. And we'll close out now, Sean, and move on. If you want to hit the response button. I would have predicted this. I would have predicted this. This is good. Good information. We'll share this with you all if you have interest later. Thank you. So the vast majority haven't done this yet. Of those who have, it's a few programs, and there's likely a trend. So when we think about this journey and using this diagram to isolate the respective milestones for individual patients, we have to remember that providers have a view of this too. They're participating in that patient's journey, of course, also. Similarly, so too are the pharmacies. They're receiving these prescriptions either directly, they're referring patients that have problems to these programs, and or future tense, they're participating holistically with the entity who are providing these services. The payers have a role here too, particularly as policy gets placed, but not introduced in a timely manner, in a consistent manner, and across all of their plans. They make policy on a product, but that policy is not deployed fast, consistent, and across all their geographies. And of course, our clients have a role here too. And all of these are going to come together and just be an ecosystem of how all of these stakeholders, all of these patient journeys, all of these milestones in their step, all of these barriers, and all of the reporting and recording of this becomes an ecosystem that we need to build, that we need to be a part of. So at this point, I've reached the end. I'm at time, and Amber, Sean, others, I'd like to open it up to questions, if we could, please.
Great, thanks, Bill. First question, I understand the content of the webinar is applicable mainly to the US, but in other countries where we do not have the same access flows, how do you suggest we connect a PSP with a payer without violating privacy and avoiding commercial bias?
Sean, can you pick up right one more time? Ask the question, the second half of the question another time, please.
Sure. I'll read the whole thing one more time. I understand the content of the webinar is applicable mainly to the US, but in other countries where we do not have the same access flows, how do you suggest we connect a PSP with a payer without violating privacy and avoiding commercial bias?
Wow. Great, insightful question that I'm probably not the best person to answer. My focus, my practice is US, but my intuition and my reasoning, my experience suggests, let's keep it in the context of specialty therapeutics, which by design are for specific patient populations, many for which require differential diagnostic and many for which are rare. So if we put the context in there, then I see on a national healthcare system every reason to work directly with that healthcare system to identify the appropriate differential diagnostic workup to identify proper patients for care to which their policies then get applied. And when the healthcare system and the providers do that workup in concordance to the national standards and imprimatur, then the policy for that individual patient won't get questioned. So it's symbiotic of defining the standard of care for appropriate patients and identification of those patients, and then subsequently the documentation to defend appropriateness for that patient for that therapy. And I'm just using analogs here in the US, such as cancer care and NCCN standards and things of that nature. Sean, Amber, next question.
Great, next question. What are some of the reasons for manufacturers to include PBM-owned specialty pharmacies in network versus not include them?
I think there are several, but the first is behind the scenes, there's usually negotiation on a formulary rebate basis to ensure patients get simpler access to therapy. That's number one. You would get less PA restrictions. You would get more favorable treatment. Number two is payers they prefer their patients in their plans go to their pharmacies for a variety of reasons: continuity of workflow, data integrity, data transparency, population health management, making sure patients are being products are being used consistently for the appropriate patients. So there's all sorts of reasons to include pairs, PBMs. But in some specialties, I'm going to answer the opposite now. In some specialties, they're not preferred because it disrupts the continuity of care when the clinician has a specialty pharmacy or preferred pharmacy for which their workflows, their data, and their patient handoffs are more seamless. They want to work with the pharmacy who's part of their healthcare system for just continuity of patient care. So I hope that answered the question. Let's go on to the third question.
Okay, next one is a two-part question. Do you have any thoughts on manufacturers having universal copay cards for specialty pharmacies and providers to enroll patients into copay savings programs? And the second part, does this increase utilization of the copay savings program?
Great question. I'm going to ask you both to repeat it. And if any of my colleagues, Jason, if you're on, Kelly, if you're on, unmute yourselves and help me participate in this. Ask this question a second time, please.
Sure. Do you have any thoughts on manufacturers having universal copay cards for specialty pharmacies and providers to enroll patients into copay savings programs? And the next part, does this increase utilization of the copay savings program?
I don't think the answer to that question is as binary as the question was asked. And the reason is it has, in my view, but there are others who are much more expert than I. Kelly, are you on? Jason, if you're on, if you would, can you take a nod? And I'll hand this over to you in just a second. The reason is that we're seeing much more specific design of copay programs that are both a specific function of the setting of care to which the copay is being applied, whether or not it's a pharmacy versus a medical benefit, and whether or not the patient, where they are in their cascade of utilization of that copay offer with respect to how much allowance there is for that fiscal calendar year. So in my mind, I see much more trend towards patient specificity and away from universal cards. Now, having said that, there is universal enrollment. So the physical card themselves, maybe not so much, but the universal enrollment that then gets applied on a patient-specific basis, we do see that trend.
Okay, and we can definitely have the trial card team follow up also to the person who posed that question.
Please get that individual's name and contact information. We'll answer directly with individuals who are much better at this than I.
You got it. Next question, Bill. When using an e-prescription to onboard patients into patient support programs, at what point in the overall patient journey does the referral to the non-commercial dispensing pharmacy move beyond fiduciary pharmacy responsibilities that necessitate each patient opt-in and consent for support services?
Wow, great question. Insightful question. Well, first off, be mindful of a fiduciary pharmacy responsibility to help that patient gain access to therapy, which usually is in the context of the patient journey we described and the red light, green light, yellow light graphic that we just displayed at the beginning of the presentation. So when the journey moves beyond the accountability and responsibility of the pharmacy in their typical workflows to include additional services that are not administered by or accessible to them and require a referral of that patient and that problem to the specific program to satisfy. That's the trigger. Usually that's the trigger to accommodate that patient now needs to enroll into those services. For example, no insurance means the pharmacy can't adjudicate, and it's beyond a fiduciary pharmacy responsibility to investigate that patient's financial status for eligibility into a PAP program. That's a classic example. Another classic example is when samples / starter supply / vouchers / consigned goods are not available, accessible to the commercial dispensing pharmacies and or the providers themselves. That instead, the pharmacy now needs to get that patient to a bridge product or a starter supply, and that's only available through consigned inventory at the non-commercial dispensing pharmacy. That's another example where their role as a pharmacy and pharmacist move, and they now have to orchestrate and help that patient enroll into additional services. At such time is when consent for those services would be necessary. So those are two examples, and at a holistic level, when the pharmacy and the pharmacist have to get services that aren't accessible to them directly.
Got it.
Next question, please.
The next question, in milestone 6, patient engagement included mobile web platforms for patient follow-up throughout the patient journey. Could you provide some examples of how this would work in the patient journey after gaining access to treatment?
Oh, of course. Digital mobile web is inclusive of all tactics, right? So the classic one of what we're doing today that's routine and customary is the phone calls, be they structured cadence or be they stimuli for the patients to call in themselves. Similarly, the refill reminder texts serve the same purpose in a classic traditional, the market today and historically speaking. Going forward, you're going to see, well, currently in the market today, you also have chat boxes. And these chat boxes, if you really, really look at them, they're just repurposing curated content that's been approved by MLR review that's been geared towards specific questions. So they look like, they feel like, and they're being responded to individual inquiries, but the responses themselves are kind of boxed, if you will. Going forward, digital mobile web, you'll have that type of chat box technology, but it'll be instead accessible via phone. The patient will be able to log into their specific account, much like providers do today on portals. And in their account, they'll be able to be informed in a reporting dashboard manner where they are in their journey. They'll be informed with respect to curated content that's been previously approved, videos, patient brochures, other technologies, digital, that inform the patient as to the various parts of their journey, be it the product, be it the disease, be it snippets of patient advocates who experience certain parts of the journey, how to travel with drug, for example. And then in addition to that, that'll become, as the technology and the governance and the allowance and the compliance matter allows, that'll become more dialogue oriented also, using the text in a manner to move data back and forth directly to patients, to provider, their support programs. Sean, next question.
Next question, how successful do you believe that e-services will become to offset traditional methods in staffing and patient support programs?
Great question. It's the answer is multifactorial. First and foremost, it's a function of med-burn versus pharmacy. It's a function of launch product versus mature product. It's a function of, does that product have therapeutic equivalence or not, i.e. there are preferred products be used on that patient's plan or not. It's also a direct function of prior auths and restrictions. And it's also it's a function, go all the way back to the beginning of the question, it's a function of the definition of success. Success in our world is green light, green light, green light, and the patient's financial responsibility is known. You're not going to get there without resolving all of these other restrictions and considerations first. So if success is limited to understanding the barriers, then we're going to get there. If success is resolving those barriers and getting to patient copay amount, then there's a level set of expectations that should be introduced to our audience, to particularly pharma, that you need to be mindful that e-services are going to display what the problem is. E-services are going to display what the status is, but they're not going to get you to the finish line until all of those barriers have been resolved. We probably have time for a few more, Sean.
Yes. So the next question, Bill, are there any observable trends, quote unquote, inside of biopharma manufacturers observed from your role and perspective as an architect of patient support services within TrialCard?
Inside of pharma. Yeah, actually. Both, first off, let's bifurcate pharma, our life science clients, into two large categories. Emergent biotech, ostensibly with an asset that they're building a company around, or several products within that. But nonetheless, it's an entity, it's a commercial entity that's built around a limited number of products versus large pharma. So I'm going to bifurcate the market and speak to each. Usually assets to which they're building companies around, emerging biopharma launching their first commercial product. They tend to want to get closer and closer and closer to their actual customers, their stakeholders themselves, largely the providers, the patients, and the distribution channel. And they're looking to their partners, ourselves, for example, to be back office and to deploy and orchestrate the various programs, and that they retain the patient-facing, provider-facing responsibilities. So that's one trend, and that's correlated to the more narrow the patient profile becomes. On the large pharma side, and this is just this calendar year, by the way, of course it started COVID, but it's really become noticeable this calendar year, where we're seeing a trend toward insourcing core services themselves. And more specifically, it's the manner in which they manage their patient support programs are being internalized and deployed in a consistent manner across both their business units or products within a business unit. So you're getting a movement towards internalization of patient support services, A, B, and itemization and preferential choosing whom are their providers they're going to lockstep with. And we, TrialCard, have been beneficiary to that. And then the core to all of that on the big pharma side is the technology platform that they're actually going to do that on, and the subsequent integration into that technology platform of these services, of these technologies that they themselves, A, don't yet have, and B, may not have direct access to, and as such are looking to their partners like TrialCard to orchestrate and engineer access to those technologies as a strategic back office partner on their behalf.
Great. And time for one last question to squeeze in here, Bill. What's the next disruptive, transformative trend in the biopharma patient access support industry?
There are a lot. Engaging patients directly and keeping them participative in their care, not just between prescription written and first start, but after. And the second, and these are inextricably linked, the second is the provider entity, the patient support provider entities like TrialCard being integrated in a collaborative manner with the channel partners, such that the referral of that patient comes with and is accepted by the channel partners for them to be able to adjudicate without doing additional work. That's disruptive.
All right, well, we are just about out of time. Bill, thanks for a great session today, and thank you for sponsoring TrialCard. Great job, thank you so much. Just a reminder, the webinar has been recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the video so that you can view it again. And to access additional webinars or get information on how your organization can speak or sponsor, please visit wcwebed.com. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. And this now concludes today's discussion.
And thank you all for taking time today. I very much appreciate your time and respect that. Thank you, Sean. Thank you to your team.
Thank you.